I get asked these silly questions sometimes because I, like every entrepreneur and, well, most entrepreneurs and every single solopreneur, I don't just have the job of showing up to do the job. I mean, in our business, the Tell It Like It Is Incorporated, we own a DJ and AV business. We do video production work. We do audio production, audio reinforcement work. Sometimes we do lighting. Sometimes we shoot film. Sometimes we shoot still pictures. Always we produce content like this podcast and other interviews. We produce those for some other people and on our own, but I'm also a speaker, a teacher, a trainer, and a coach. And so all of those things fall under my responsibility to pull them off, to write the content for the training classes, to produce the slides for the training classes, to set up the sound system, the cameras, and the microphones that I use in the training classes. So before I step to the front of the room to make a presentation, there's almost no aspect of a production that I haven't touched. Oftentimes, literally, personally, myself. I put the lapel mic on. I check the batteries in it. I set the cameras. I adjust the angles. I check the switcher to make sure that everything works properly. And it's all on me, and there's nobody else to back me up on that. Now, I have my family as helpers most of the time in one angle or another, whether it's my wife or one of my sons. But for the most part, if it happens, I'm responsible for it. And that includes one other area that sometimes is a little more complicated to present, and that is sales. Meaning, if I don't close the deal, we don't have the business. I have to close the deal, whether I'm DJing a wedding or I'm hosting an event or I'm producing a show for someone else. I have to close the deal if I'm speaking from the stage or writing the program for a new training course. I have to close the deal. And sometimes I get asked silly questions, and that's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And if you've spent any amount of time with me, whether it's here on this podcast, in the interviews that I've done for the other two podcasts we do, StoryPower TV and Transforming Grace TV, or it's in a class that I've taught, then you know this about me. I answer almost every question with a story. Not necessarily just with an answer. But the question I was asked from a host who was putting on this mega event, they're expecting 350 to 400 physicians and highly educated, highly intelligent business owners, business operators, and investors at this conference about wealth and leadership. And I was targeted as someone who might be willing to speak there. So in the interview on the call, they asked me, what do you talk about the most? And I said, well, story power. And they said, is that leadership? How in the world is story power leadership? Of course, I can't just answer a question with a simple answer. Years ago, many years ago, I was in the garage playing with this thing that I found in the toolbox. And I would spin it between my hands and it would open up like a giant flower and then it would close back up. And it was really cool. It kind of looked like the mixer Mom used. She would stick in the blender and mix up the cake. It looked like one of those. But Moms, when you spin them, chocolate might fly off of them, but they didn't open up and then close up and then open up and then close up. And I thought it was really cool. I kept spinning it. The faster I'd spin it, the more it would open up. And finally, my uncle walked up behind me and smacked me in the back of the head. It's like a good Gibbs smack. And I said, well, what was that for? He said, do you know what you're doing? I said, yeah, I spin it like this and it opens up and it looks really, really cool. And he said, stop doing that. You don't even know what that is. I said, no, but when I spun it again and he smacked me again. He said, seriously, stop doing that. You have no idea what that is. And I said, well, but what is it? He said, well, that's the kind of tool that you would put down inside the cylinder of an engine when it's been damaged in some way, maybe bad rings or a scarred piston or something. And you would put that down in there and it spins at a very specific amount of pressure against the outside walls of the cylinder. And it's balanced very specifically that when you put it on your drill and you spin it in there, it rehones the inside of the cylinder. Now, nowadays they have gigantic machines where they do all 4, 6, or 8 cylinders at one time and it's measured precisely. But back in the day when I was a kid and before that, they actually would do that on a hand drill. They would put this thing that expands when it spins down inside the motor, and they'd push the spin button, and there you go. That would do it. And he said, you have no idea how expensive that thing is, or how much damage you can do not only to that device, but to everything they try to fix with it, not realizing that it's out of balance because you've been doing this with it. Now, what in the world does that have to do with leadership? Maybe it's a fascinating story. Maybe you can even relate and say, well, there was a time in my life that I was spinning the toy that wasn't a toy and damaged something. Or maybe you can even find a place in your life where you realize that you were doing unknown damage as a leader because what you were doing in the moment seemed to you harmless. See, the idea that a story causes you to think outside the realm of the words that are actually being said. That's how story power is a leadership tool. Now see, as a salesman, I've got to be able to convey that what I teach from the platform, what I speak in a keynote speech, may not sound like overwhelming, overdriving, powerful education that you've got to take, 500 pages worth of notes on. But if you're listening, you'll find that you're learning a lot more through the evidence of the stories and the relatability to the details, not the details that I'm telling, but the ones that you live through. The things that you've already experienced, the emotions, the mistakes, the aha moments that you're like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about it quite like that yet. But now that I'm thinking about it, it explodes a whole new series of thoughts in my head. See, my job as a communicator is to be able to get across to you without pounding on you these new ideas. It's to cause you to become more aware of the evidence in life that you already know what you're talking about. You've already been down that road. You've already made that mistake. You've already probably even corrected yourself from it. The question now is, how do you convey to the people that you lead that you get it? See, that's one of the big gaps that we have today. We have an enormous gap in communication between the generations. We have one generation that speaks mostly tech. They live their lives in 30 to 60 second episodes that we would call TikTok or short reels on YouTube or reels on Facebook. You got 1 minute or less to get across your point, to make an impression, to tell them what it is that you have to say. And if you communicate like a Harry Potter novel and everything that you say takes a 15-page outline and 22 bullet points and 5 subpoints for each of those bullet points, the odds that you're going to even convey anything to them worthwhile are, well, 0. But if you can figure out how to envelop in one story concepts, ideas, revelations, exploding discoveries that they might catch right now while they're hearing the story. They might actually put themselves in the story as the uncle who discovered the nephew doing something stupid and risky and expensive and try to find a way to interject themselves to say, I've watched you damage that long enough. I've observed you as your leader, as your superior, as your elder. I've observed you making a mistake that you may think is harmless and isolated, but really, in the grand scheme of things, it's an enormous problem. And I think now it's time for me to step in, maybe not to slap you in the back of the head, but at least to bring some sort of correction to let you know what you're doing is dangerous and harmful and you've got to stop. Maybe it's just your tweets. Maybe what I've caught you doing is the way that you talk to your peers. Maybe what I've caught you doing is the amount of time you spend on your own cell phone and not on the work that you're supposed to be doing. Maybe instead, they don't find themselves in the place of the uncle making the correction, but they find themselves in the place of the nephew playing with the device that's not a toy. And what they need is to be reminded that sometimes what you have access to is significantly more powerful than your understanding of it. What you have access to is significantly more powerful than your understanding of it. Imagine, and this happens every day, imagine putting someone 22, 23 years old, straight out of college, no major life experiences, no kids at home, no family to be responsible for, putting in their hands a $25 million, $125 million device. Would you do that? Would you make the choice to spend $25 to $125 million building something and then hand it to a young, inexperienced in life kind of a person and say, here, use this? Well, if they're the kind of person that stands in the garage and spins around a tool that they think is a toy, then handing them a $25 million to $125 million device is, well, that's just crazy. And yet we do it every day, don't we? We do. But sometimes in the military, we teach them to be fighter pilots. I know I was 20 years old the first time I drove a fire truck. That's a $250,000 piece of equipment. And I drove it within 10 feet or 20 feet of a fighter aircraft loaded with ammunition, loaded with hot brakes, with fuel, with a life or two inside it. I mean, it only takes a small mistake. But if you're the kind of irresponsible person that tears up tools because you think they're toys, handing you a $250,000 fire truck and putting you next to a $100 million fighter aircraft, that's just crazy. You see how the story itself opens up a whole new can of worms of the way that we have to think about life. Sure, it's a 2-minute story. It means very little to anybody. If you haven't stood in my garage and played with the tools in my toolbox, then it's probably not relevant to you at all, right? I hope you're astute enough as a leader and as a communicator to understand how crucial it is to be able to take a story that seems like an irrelevant incident and draw from it the parallels, the illustrations, the point necessary to teach leadership. And if I can stand on the platform at your event and tell 4 or 5 stories that cause people to go, oh boy, yeah, I've been there, I've done that. It was different. It was a fighter jet, or it was a fire truck, or it was some other, I gave somebody the code to the back door at Wall Street, literally, not just the financial code to figure out how to manage Wall Street, but how to break the bank, so to speak, or literally how to walk in and ring the bell on Wall Street if that's what they wanted to do. I remember making those decisions. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're making the decision on how then do I correct them when I realize that what they're doing is dangerous. It's a faulty understanding of the power of what's in their hands. See, we do it every day when we hand a teenager car keys. Sure, it's a $10,000 or $20,000 car, maybe a $50,000 car. I do have friends that gave their kids keys to a Porsche. Was it the little 4-door thing, not the Carrera, but I don't even know the name of it, the 4-door Porsche, Cayenne. Yeah, that one. And he's 20 years old and driving around in a $150,000 car. And I mean, it only takes a minor mishap to do $50,000 worth of damage to that car trying to put in a parking space. Those are major decisions in the hands of young, immature people. But leaders have to make that decision every day. And you've got to judge by character and judge by experience and judge by evidence whether or not this person can handle what you're about to put in their hands. If they're going to stand in the garage and play with a tool as if it's a toy, are they still going to do the same thing 5 years from then? Are they still going to be the same kind of young, irresponsible, unattentive, unaware of what they're playing with kind of a person that's going to do more damage than good? Can you train that out of them? Can you teach them more responsibility? Can you correct them along the way while the price is small? A tool that's 20 years outdated and probably won't be back in another cylinder because the man who knew how to use it the best is long since gone. If that's the case, then maybe the correction over the tool is not that big a deal, but the idea of teaching responsibility and the magnitude of damage that can be done by irresponsibility, now that's a lesson worth teaching. And whatever teachable moment you have to use that, that's good. Take it. When I'm asked, how in the world is StoryPower a leadership tool? It's a whole lot easier to demonstrate the answer to that question than it is just to answer the question. But if the answer that I've given you today in 14 minutes doesn't satisfy the question for you, give me a call. Send me a private message. I'd be delighted to take your scenario, your learning experience, your story, and teach you how to use your story or 52 stories. I recommend to people that they have about 100 stories because every moment in life that is a teachable moment is a story worth conveying. How do you convey it? How do you identify the right stories out of your life? Well, that's what the StoryPower MasterClass is all about. If you go to StoryPowerMasterClass.com, you'll see we've got one coming up in June. You're welcome to join us. It's a great opportunity. It's about 6 hours of intense training. But The way that I sell that class is just what I just did. I demonstrate through the power of a story how many layers there are in a story and how you can find yourself in it. And then I teach you how to extract stories from your own life and do the same thing. So is story power a leadership tool? Absolutely it is. It's also a tool for correction, correcting yourself, correcting those you lead. It's also a tool for marketing. It's a great tool for marketing. If you tell people about what you do in a way that they feel like they resonate with your story, they want to do business with you. Why? Because stories build know, like, and trust. And know, like, and trust, as we know, is the key to doing business with anybody. Have I said enough? Have I said too much? See, that's only for you to decide. But I really do believe that story power is a leadership tool, and a marketing tool, and a communication tool, and a self-awareness tool, and a self-esteem building tool, and a relationship building tool. It's a very powerful tool, story power. That's why I do it. Go to StoryPowerMasterClass.com and find out the details. Love to see you in class. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.